The third bullet hit Marcus Richardson while he was already dying on the cold asphalt, looking up at stars he'd navigated by in 3 war zones. Officer Blake Garrison pressed the gun against Marcus's temple and pulled the trigger one final time, the muzzle flash illuminating his satisfied smile. "Another problem solved," Garrison whispered, holstering his weapon. What the officer didn't know was that Marcus's phone, lying 3 feet from his cooling body, had just sent an emergency alert to 6 phones across America. 6 men who'd sworn an oath that some people never break. 6 Delta Force operators who were about to teach Garrison that some brothers never leave their fallen behind. Before we begin this story of justice and brotherhood, hit that subscribe button and stay until the end. Comment which city you're watching from so we can see how far Marcus's story travels. Because some stories need to be heard everywhere. Marcus Richardson's prosthetic leg clicked softly against the linoleum as he pushed through the glass doors of the Shell station on Oakwood Boulevard. The titanium and carbon fiber replacement had cost the VA more than most people earned in a year, but Marcus had earned it the hard way, leaving part of himself in Afghan soil 3 years ago when an IED turned his world into fire and darkness. "Just coffee and gum," he murmured to himself, a habit he'd picked up during long night patrols in Kandahar. 10 minutes, then home to help Claudia plan Destiny's party. His 8-year-old niece still believed the world was fundamentally good, that heroes always won and villains always lost. Marcus wanted to keep that innocence alive as long as possible, even though his own experience had taught him darker truths. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in that peculiar gas station glow that made 9:47 p.m. feel like 3 in the morning. Behind bulletproof glass, a teenage cashier scrolled through his phone, barely glancing up as Marcus approached the coffee station. Marcus selected a medium cup and began filling it with dark roast, the rich aroma cutting through the petroleum fumes and pine-scented air freshener. Through the large windows, he could see his black Ford F-150 parked at Pump 3, freshly washed because old military habits died hard. Everything maintained, everything ready, everything in its place. The bell above the entrance chimed. Marcus glanced up and felt that familiar tightening in his chest, the same sensation that had saved his life a dozen times in combat. Not fear exactly, but recognition. After 15 years, leading men through the most dangerous places on earth, Marcus could read intent in a person's posture, their breathing pattern, the way they positioned their hands. The police officer who'd just walked in moved like someone hunting. Officer Blake Garrison had been having a terrible shift. 3 traffic stops with nothing worth writing, a domestic dispute that turned out to be neighbors arguing over a barking dog. Now, he was stuck working late in this part of town where people who didn't belong kept acting like they owned the place. He saw Marcus at the coffee station and felt that familiar heat rising in his chest, the sensation that preceded his best work. A black man moving slowly late at night. In Garrison's mind, the narrative was already writing itself. Suspicious behavior, potential threat, reason to investigate. The prosthetic leg only reinforced his assumptions about dependency and weakness. Garrison had never met a Medal of Honor nominee, never commanded soldiers in combat, never made life-or-death decisions that saved innocent lives. All he saw was someone he could control. Marcus finished preparing his coffee and moved toward the snack aisle, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. He'd been navigating police attention since childhood, learning the survival protocols that shouldn't exist, but did. Keep your hands visible. Don't make sudden movements. Answer questions politely but briefly. Comply with everything. Survive the encounter. Fight the injustice later through proper channels. He selected a pack of spearmint gum and began walking toward the counter, his prosthetic clicking softly against the floor. "Excuse me." The voice carried that particular tone of authority that police officers use when they've already decided someone is guilty of something. Marcus stopped and turned slowly, keeping the coffee in his left hand and the gum in his right, both items clearly visible. "Yes, officer. How can I help you?" "What are you doing here?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Not "what are you buying?" or "is there a problem?" but "what are you doing here?" as if Marcus's presence required justification, as if this public space wasn't equally his. "Getting coffee and gum, sir. Heading home to my sister's house." Garrison stepped closer, his hand moving instinctively toward his utility belt. "You live around here?" "Yes, sir. About 6 blocks away on Elm Street, number 2847. "Let me see some ID." Marcus nodded slowly, his heart rate elevating, but his voice remaining calm. "It's in my wallet back pocket. I'm going to reach for it now." "Do it slow." Marcus set his coffee down on a nearby shelf and reached carefully for his wallet, moving with the deliberate precision he'd learned from too many encounters just like this one. He pulled out his driver's license and held it out his hand perfectly steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. Garrison took the license without looking at it, his eyes still fixed on Marcus's face. "You been drinking tonight?" "No, sir." "Any drugs in your system? Any weapons on you?" "No, sir. Nothing like that." "Turn around. Put your hands on that shelf." The teenage cashier had stopped scrolling through his phone and was now watching the interaction with growing concern, his finger hovering over the record button. The security camera mounted in the corner continued its silent documentation, capturing every word and movement. Marcus hesitated for just a moment, not out of defiance, but out of the basic human dignity that rebels against being treated like a criminal for buying coffee. That single moment of hesitation was all Garrison needed. "I said, turn around." Garrison's voice escalated, his hand now resting on his service weapon. "You got a problem following simple instructions?" "No, sir. I'm complying." Marcus turned around and placed his hands on the shelf, his prosthetic legs supporting his weight at an awkward angle that sent pain shooting through his residual limb. Behind him, he could hear Garrison's breathing quicken with something that sounded disturbingly like excitement. "Officer, I haven't done anything wrong. I'm just buying coffee." "That's not for you to decide." Garrison's hands began patting down Marcus's jacket with unnecessary force. "I determine if you've done something wrong." The search was aggressive and humiliating, hands roaming over Marcus's body as if he were already convicted of some unnamed crime. Garrison found exactly what he expected to find. Nothing. No weapons, no drugs, no contraband of any kind. Just a wallet, keys, phone, and the small dignity of a man who'd served his country and asked for nothing more than the right to buy coffee in peace. But finding nothing didn't satisfy Garrison. If anything, it frustrated him further. "What's wrong with your leg?" "Prosthetic, sir. I'm a disabled veteran. Lost it in Kandahar 3 years ago." "Prove it." Marcus turned around slowly, maintaining eye contact as he rolled up his left pant leg to reveal the titanium and carbon fiber prosthetic. The sight of it should have changed everything, should have triggered recognition of service and sacrifice, should have de-escalated the entire encounter. Instead, Garrison's jaw tightened. "How do I know you're not hiding something in there?" He tapped the prosthetic with his baton, the metallic sound echoing through the gas station. Marcus's jaw clenched almost imperceptibly. In 15 years of military service, in 3 combat deployments, in countless life-threatening situations, he'd never felt as threatened as he did in that moment. Not by enemy fire or roadside bombs, but by a police officer in his own hometown looking for any excuse to escalate. "Officer, it's a medical device. There's nothing to hide. It's sealed." "I'll be the judge of that. Sit down, on the floor, right now." Marcus looked around the gas station at the dirty floor at the teenage cashier, who was now definitely recording at the security camera, capturing everything. In Afghanistan, he'd made split-second decisions that saved lives. He'd led men through situations where death was a heartbeat away. But in this moment, he was just another black man being humiliated by someone with a badge and a gun. He lowered himself carefully to the floor, his prosthetic making the movement awkward and painful. The linoleum was cold and sticky against his hands, smelling of industrial cleaner and spilled gasoline. "Officer, my name is Marcus Richardson. I live at 2847 Elm Street. I'm a retired Army sergeant, 15 years of service. I'm not a threat to anyone." "Shut up!" Garrison stood over him, shadow falling across Marcus like a dark promise. "Don't tell me what you are or aren't." The teenager behind the counter had his phone out now, fingers moving quickly across the screen. Marcus couldn't see what he was doing, but he hoped someone was paying attention. Someone was recording, someone might care enough to witness what was happening. "You think because you got a fake leg you get special treatment?" Garrison's voice carried an edge of something deeper than professional authority, something that sounded disturbingly like pleasure. "You think that makes you some kind of hero?" Marcus looked up at him, and for just a moment, Garrison saw something in those eyes that should have warned him. Not fear or submission, but the calm recognition of someone who'd faced real enemies in real wars, someone who'd learned the difference between actual threats and bullies with badges. "I think I have the right to buy coffee without being treated like a criminal, sir." The words were simple, dignified, and true. They should have ended the encounter. Instead, they ignited something dark in Garrison's mind, something that had been building for years through a career of unchecked power and protected misconduct. "You've got an attitude problem. Stand up, now." Marcus began the careful process of getting up from the floor, using the shelf for support, as his prosthetic adjusted to bear weight again. It took longer than Garrison's impatience could tolerate. "Move faster." "I'm moving as fast as I can, officer. The prosthetic needs time to—" "Don't give me excuses." Marcus finally got to his feet, breathing slightly heavy from the effort. He turned to face Garrison, and in that moment, the officer saw what he interpreted as defiance. What Marcus was actually feeling was exhaustion, the bone-deep weariness of a man who'd given everything to his country and asked for nothing more than basic human dignity in return. "Put your hands behind your back." "For what? What's the charge?" "Resisting arrest." "I haven't resisted anything." "You're resisting right now." Marcus slowly put his hands behind his back, his mind racing through options that all led to the same conclusion. There was no winning this encounter. Garrison was going to arrest him for buying coffee while black, and there was nothing Marcus could do to stop it without making everything exponentially worse. That's when Garrison's radio crackled to life. "Unit 247, we have a domestic disturbance call at 1456 Pine Street. Respond immediately." Garrison paused, his handcuffs halfway out of their case. A real call, an actual emergency that required his attention. For a moment, Marcus thought the universe had provided an escape route for both of them. "Unit 247 responding," Garrison said into his radio, his voice professional and controlled. Then he looked back at Marcus with something that looked disturbingly like disappointment, as if he'd been denied something he'd been anticipating. "This isn't over," Garrison said quietly, stepping close enough that only Marcus could hear. "Next time you're in my town, maybe you'll think twice about that attitude." "Officer, I just want to pay for my coffee and go home to my family." "Yeah, well, we don't always get what we want, do we?" Garrison turned and headed for the door, leaving Marcus standing by the coffee station, with his hands still behind his back, adrenaline coursing through his system, and dignity hanging in tatters. The bell chimed as the officer left the sound almost cheerful in its complete disconnection from what had just occurred. The teenage cashier buzzed Marcus through to the register, his eyes wide with a mixture of sympathy and outrage. "You okay, man?" he asked, as Marcus paid for his coffee and gum. "I'm fine," Marcus replied, though they both knew that wasn't remotely true. "I recorded the whole thing, already uploaded it to Twitter and TikTok. That cop was way out of line." Marcus nodded, appreciating the gesture, but knowing from experience that viral videos rarely changed anything. Tomorrow people would shake their heads and move on to the next outrage. The system that protected officers like Garrison would continue protecting them, and men like Marcus would continue navigating a world where buying coffee required survival protocols. He walked back to his truck, his hands shaking slightly as he unlocked the door and climbed inside. For a moment, he just sat there, letting his heart rate return to normal, trying to process the casual cruelty he'd just experienced. His phone buzzed with a text from his sister Claudia. "Looking forward to seeing you. Destiny's been asking about Uncle Marcus all day. She wants to show you her new book." Marcus smiled for the first time all evening. His niece still believed the world was basically good, that heroes and villains were clearly marked, that justice always won in the end. He wanted to keep it that way for as long as possible, even though he'd just experienced firsthand how far the world was from that innocent vision. He started his truck and began driving home, completely unaware that Officer Blake Garrison had just received another call on his personal phone, a call that would change everything. Unit 247, this is dispatch. We've received a report of a suspicious vehicle leaving the Shell station on Oakwood. Black Ford F-150 license plate matching the individual you just questioned. Driver described as uncooperative during initial contact. Can you make a traffic stop? The call was fabricated, of course. Garrison had made it himself using a voice modulation app he'd learned about from other officers who used similar techniques to create probable cause when none existed. It was a perfect system. Generate your own call, respond to your own call, and whatever happened next was justified as an officer responding to a legitimate emergency. Marcus was 3 blocks from home thinking about his niece's birthday party and whether they should get the chocolate or vanilla cake when the red and blue lights appeared in his rearview mirror. His stomach dropped. Not again. Not twice in one night. He pulled over immediately, putting the truck in park and placing his hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, exactly as he'd been trained to do since childhood. Every black parent teaches their children this ritual: hands visible, no sudden movements, comply with all orders, live to fight another day. Garrison approached the driver's side window with his weapon drawn, but held low, and in that moment, Marcus knew with absolute certainty that something was very wrong. This wasn't a routine traffic stop. This was something else entirely. Turn off the engine and step out of the vehicle. Marcus complied, moving slowly and deliberately, his prosthetic clicking against the truck's running board as he lowered himself to the ground. "Officer, what's the problem? Why did you pull me over?" "We received a report of a suspicious vehicle. This vehicle. Driver threatening a gas station clerk." Marcus felt ice water flood his veins. He'd done nothing threatening. The teenager had been sympathetic, even supportive, recording evidence of police misconduct. This was a complete fabrication, and they both knew it. "Officer, that's not what happened. I never threatened anyone." "Are you calling me a liar?" "I'm saying there's been a serious misunderstanding." "Turn around. Hands behind your back. Now." Marcus turned around, his mind racing through calculations. He was 3 blocks from home. His sister expected him for dinner tomorrow. His niece was counting on him for her birthday party. All he had to do was survive the next few minutes, and he could file a complaint later. Lawyers existed. The system had mechanisms for addressing police misconduct. He just had to get through this. But as Garrison approached with handcuffs, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since his last firefight in Afghanistan: the absolute certainty that he was in mortal danger. "Officer, I'm a disabled veteran. I'm not a threat to anyone. I'm complying with everything you're asking." "You should have thought about that before you threatened that clerk." "I never threatened anyone. Please, you can check the security footage." Garrison grabbed Marcus's left arm and yanked it behind his back with unnecessary force. The motion threw Marcus off balance, and his prosthetic leg couldn't compensate quickly enough. He stumbled slightly, catching himself against the truck. "Stop resisting." "I'm not resisting. I lost my balance." Garrison's knee struck Marcus in the back, driving him face first into the side of his truck. Marcus's cheek scraped against the cold metal, and he tasted blood where his lips split against his teeth. "Please." Marcus said, his voice still calm, despite everything. Despite the pain and fear and terrible knowledge of what was about to happen. "You're hurting me. I'm not resisting. I'm complying with everything." "You should have complied at the gas station." That's when Marcus made the last mistake of his life. As Garrison continued trying to handcuff him, Marcus's survival instincts, honed by 15 years of military training and 3 combat deployments, caused him to shift his weight and adjust his stance to better balance on his prosthetic leg. The movement was subtle, barely noticeable, designed only to keep him from falling. Garrison interpreted it as resistance. "He's going for my weapon." Garrison shouted to no one, his voice carrying across the empty street, performing for cameras that might be watching, establishing the narrative that would justify what came next. Marcus's hands were behind his back. He was pressed against his truck. There was no weapon within reach, no aggressive movement, no threat of any kind. But Garrison had already decided how this encounter would end. "No," Marcus said, turning his head to look at the officer, his voice steady, despite the terror flooding his system. I'm not reaching for anything. Please." The first bullet caught him in the back just below his right shoulder blade, the impact spinning him around. As he fell, Marcus saw Garrison's face in the muzzle flash, and what he saw there wasn't fear or defensive panic. It was satisfaction. The second bullet hit him in the chest as he hit the asphalt, pain exploding through his body, like the IED that had taken his leg like fire and darkness, and the end of everything. The third bullet came as Marcus lay on his back, looking up at stars he'd navigated by in Kandahar and Helmand Province and a dozen other places where he'd risked his life to protect people who would never know his name. Garrison pressed the gun against Marcus's temple, and in that final moment Marcus thought about his niece's destiny, about whether she would understand why Uncle Marcus wouldn't make it to her birthday party. The muzzle flash was the last thing he saw. Garrison stood over the body, his service weapon still smoking, and reached for his radio, his voice perfectly calm and professional. "Shots fired. Officer involved shooting. Suspect is down. I need backup and medical immediately." As sirens began wailing in the distance, Garrison began constructing his report in his mind. Suspicious individual threatening behavior at gas station became aggressive during traffic stop, reached for officer's weapon during arrest attempt, justified use of deadly force in defense of officer safety. It was a story he'd heard other officers tell, a narrative that juries usually believed, especially when the victim couldn't tell their side. Everything was going exactly according to plan. What Garrison didn't know was that Marcus's phone, lying 3 feet from his body, had automatically activated an emergency protocol that Delta Force veterans carried wherever they went. GPS coordinates, biometric data indicating catastrophic trauma, and a priority alert that was already pinging 6 phones across the country. What Garrison didn't know was that Marcus Richardson wasn't just any disabled veteran. He was Sergeant First Class Marcus Richardson, former team leader of Delta Force Team Viper, the most lethal close-quarters combat unit in modern military history. What Garrison didn't know was that the 6 men receiving that emergency alert had sworn an oath to each other in places where oaths were the only thing that mattered, where promises meant the difference between life and death. What Garrison didn't know was that Team Viper never left anyone behind. What Garrison didn't know was that somewhere in the darkness, 6 of the most dangerous men on Earth were already mobilizing, already booking flights, already preparing to bring a reckoning that would shake the foundations of a corrupt system. What Garrison didn't know was that he'd just started a war, and wars, as Marcus could have told him, always have casualties. The Brotherhood was coming, and they were bringing hell with them. Captain Adrian Donovan was 3,000 miles away in his Seattle apartment when Marcus Richardson died. He was reviewing security contracts for a private military company, red pen in hand, when his phone made a sound he hadn't heard in 2 years. The emergency alert tone cut through everything else like a knife. Adrian dropped his coffee mug. It shattered on the hardwood floor, dark liquid spreading across the boards like blood, but he didn't notice. His eyes were locked on the screen, on the data streaming across it in stark white letters against black. Heart rate 0, blood pressure 0, body temperature dropping, GPS coordinates, Oak Ridge, Pennsylvania, source identifier Richardson, Marcus J. Priority Code, Alpha 1. No, the word came out as a whisper. No, not Marcus. Not like this. His hands moved on autopilot muscle memory from 15 years of responding to emergencies taking over. Grab the go bag from the closet, check the weapons safe, book the next flight east. But his mind was somewhere else, entirely replaying memories of a man who'd saved his life in Kandahar, who'd carried a wounded soldier 3 miles through enemy territory, who'd refused evacuation until every other man was safe. Marcus Richardson was the heart of Team Viper, the one who held them together when everything was falling apart, the one who made them believe they could survive anything as long as they had each other. And now he was gone. Adrian's phone rang before he could fully process what the biometric data meant. Cole Mitchell's name appeared on the screen. "Tell me you're seeing this wrong," Cole said without preamble, his voice tight. "Tell me it's a malfunction." "I'm seeing the same thing you are." Adrian was already throwing clothes into his bag, his movements precise despite the rage building in his chest. "When can you get to Philadelphia?" "I'm walking out of my shop right now. There's a flight at 6:15. I'll be on it." "Good. Call the others. We converge on Oak Ridge tomorrow morning." "Adrian?" Cole's voice cracked slightly. "What happened to him?" "I don't know yet, but we're going to find out. And then we're going to make sure whoever's responsible pays for it." In Virginia Beach, Cole Mitchell stood outside his electronics repair shop, his hand shaking as he locked the door and flipped the sign to closed. A customer knocked on the glass, pointing at the laptop she'd come to pick up, but Cole didn't even turn around. Nothing else mattered. Marcus was dead, and the world had just become a much darker place. He'd been Team Viper's communications specialist, the man who could jury-rig satellite uplinks from spare parts and hack enemy systems with nothing but a laptop and sheer determination. But more than that, Marcus had been his friend. The guy who'd sat with him through 3-hour phone calls when Cole's father died. The one who'd flown across the country just to make sure Cole didn't spend his birthday alone. Cole pulled out his phone and started making calls as he drove toward the airport, his voice steady despite the grief threatening to overwhelm him. In Colorado Springs, Xavier Santos was teaching his 10-year-old daughter Maria how to change a tire in their driveway when his phone buzzed with the emergency alert. He looked at the screen and went perfectly still, his hands frozen on the lug wrench. "Dad?" Maria's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Dad, what's wrong?" Xavier couldn't speak. The biometric data was unmistakable. Marcus Richardson, the man who'd stood as best man at his wedding, who'd held Maria in the hospital the day she was born, who'd been planning to visit next month for her birthday, was dead. "We need to go inside right now, sweetheart." Something in his voice made Maria move without arguing. They went into the house where Xavier's wife, Sarah, was making dinner, humming along to the radio. Sarah. That single word carried everything. She turned from the stove and saw his face, and her expression shifted from curiosity to concern in an instant. "How long?" she asked, already understanding. "I don't know. Could be a week, could be longer." "Is it Marcus?" Xavier nodded, unable to trust his voice. Sarah had been a military wife long enough to understand that some debts transcended normal life, that some promises couldn't be broken, no matter what they cost. She crossed the kitchen and kissed him once hard. "Bring him home with honor, and then come back to us." "I will." "I know you will. You always do." Xavier went upstairs to pack his daughter, following him with wide eyes that had seen her father sad before, but never like this. "Is Uncle Marcus okay?" Maria asked quietly. Xavier knelt down to her level, taking her small hands in his. "No, baby. Uncle Marcus is gone. He went to be with the heroes." "Did bad people hurt him?" "Yes." "Are you going to stop the bad people?" "Yes." "Good." Maria hugged him fiercely. "Uncle Marcus was the best. He always brought me books." In Tampa, Quentin Williams was coming home from his overnight security shift at the port when his phone exploded with notifications. He pulled over on the side of the highway and read the emergency alert 3 times, unable to process what he was seeing. Marcus was dead. His brother, his friend, the man who'd pulled him out of a burning Humvee in Helmand Province, was gone. Quentin sat in his car on the shoulder of Interstate 275 as morning traffic rushed past, and for the first time in 8 years he let himself cry. Not the silent tears he'd shed at his mother's funeral or when his engagement fell apart, but the raw, ugly sobbing of someone who'd just lost a piece of his soul. His phone rang. Adrian's name appeared. "I know," Quentin said, his voice wrecked. "I'm already heading to the airport." "You okay to fly?" "No, but I'm flying anyway. Marcus would do the same for any of us." "He would, and he did. More times than we can count." Quentin wiped his face with the back of his hand and pulled back onto the highway, already composing the resignation text he'd send to his supervisor. This job didn't matter. Nothing mattered except getting to Pennsylvania and finding out what happened to Marcus Richardson. In Austin, Jordan Chen was deep in code when the alert came through, the emergency tone cutting through his concentration like a scream. He pulled up Marcus's biometric data and felt his stomach drop. This wasn't a malfunction or a false alarm. The GPS coordinates, the vital signs, the emergency protocol activation, all of it pointed to one terrible conclusion. Jordan's fingers flew across his keyboard, pulling up Marcus's last known communications, tracking his digital footprint, mapping the sequence of events that had led to this moment. Within 5 minutes, he'd hacked into the Oak Ridge Police Department's dispatch system and was listening to the emergency calls from the night Marcus died. Shots fired. Officer involved shooting. Suspect is down. I need backup and medical immediately. The voice was calm, rehearsed, practiced. Jordan had heard enough lies in his military career to recognize the cadence of deception. This wasn't a panicked officer who'd just survived a life-threatening encounter. This was someone who'd done this before. His phone rang. Adrian. Jordan, you getting this? I've got it. And Adrian, we've got a problem. What kind of problem? The kind where a cop murdered Marcus and thinks he's going to get away with it. I'm already in their dispatch system. The officer who shot him is named Blake Garrison. He's filed preliminary reports claiming Marcus threatened him during a traffic stop. Bullshit. Complete bullshit. I've got the gas station security footage. Marcus was buying coffee. Garrison harassed him for 10 minutes, humiliated him, forced him to sit on the floor, then let him go. The shooting happened 3 blocks away during a traffic stop that Garrison called in himself using a voice modulation app. He fabricated the call, fabricated the threat, murdered Marcus in cold blood, and filed a report claiming self-defense. And Jordan, this isn't his first time. I'm looking at his record now. 6 officer-involved shootings in 5 years. Every single one ruled justified. Every single victim was a black man. Adrian's silence on the other end of the line was more terrifying than any words could have been. Start compiling everything, Adrian said, finally his voice cold and controlled. Every case, every detail, every piece of evidence you can find. We're going to bury this bastard. In Denver, Stefan Novak was at his nephew's high school basketball game when his phone buzzed. He looked at the alert and stood up so fast he knocked over his popcorn, the kernels scattering across the bleachers. Stefan, you okay? His sister looked concerned. I have to go, right now. The game's not over for another 20 minutes. I have to go right now. Something in his tone made her stop arguing. Stefan was already walking toward the exit, his paramedic training automatically running through scenarios, calculating response times, knowing that it was already too late, but unable to stop his mind from trying to solve a problem that couldn't be solved. Marcus was dead. The man he'd kept alive through 3 firefights and 2 emergency field surgeries was gone, and Stefan hadn't been there to save him. His phone rang before he reached his car. Doc. Adrian's voice was steady, but Stefan could hear the grief underneath. You see it? I see it. What's the plan? Philadelphia by tomorrow morning. We meet, we assess, we respond. Roger that. Adrian, do we know what happened? Police shooting. Officer claims self-defense. Jordan's already digging into it. And you believe the officer's story? Not for one goddamn second. Stefan drove home through Denver traffic, his mind already shifting into combat mode. Marcus was gone, but that didn't mean the mission was over. In fact, the mission was just beginning. By midnight, 6 men scattered across the country were converging on the same destination, each carrying their own memories of Marcus Richardson and their own reasons for dropping everything to answer his final call. They remembered Marcus as he'd been in Afghanistan, unshakable under pressure, the kind of leader who inspired absolute loyalty by never asking his men to do anything he wouldn't do himself. They remembered him taking shrapnel in both legs while pulling a wounded soldier to safety, refusing medical evacuation until everyone else was secure. They remembered him leading them through a 3-day running firefight against overwhelming odds, keeping them alive through sheer force of will and tactical brilliance. They remembered him as the heart of Team Viper, the one who held them together when everything was falling apart, the one who called on birthdays and anniversaries, who showed up when you needed him without being asked, who made you believe that brotherhood meant something real and permanent and worth protecting. And now he was dead killed not by enemy fire in a distant war zone, but by a cop in his own hometown while buying coffee. Adrian's flight landed at Philadelphia International at 6:23 in the morning. Cole's arrived at 6:45. Xavier drove through the night and reached the city by 7:15. Quentin, Jordan, and Stefan all landed within an hour of each other. Their flights staggered, but their destination the same. They met at a truck stop just outside Oak Ridge in a back booth where they could talk without being overheard. 6 men who'd faced death together in 3 different countries, now sitting in a Pennsylvania diner trying to process the reality that their brother was gone. Adrian spread a map across the table, marking locations with a red pen: the gas station where Marcus had been harassed, the street where he'd been killed, the police station where his murderer was probably filing paperwork and thinking about his weekend plans. "Jordan, what do we know?" Jordan pulled out his laptop, opening files that he'd compiled during the flight. Marcus was shot 3 times by Officer Blake Garrison at approximately 10:15 last night. Official report claims Marcus reached for Garrison's weapon during a traffic stop. Garrison called for backup after the shooting, claiming self-defense. "Bullshit," Quentin said quietly. "Complete bullshit," Jordan agreed. "I've been monitoring police communications all night. There's chatter about the shooting, but also about damage control. They're already circling the wagons, coordinating their stories." Stefan leaned forward, his paramedic training making him ask the question none of them wanted to answer. "What about the scene medical response time?" Marcus was pronounced dead at 10:47. Garrison wasn't injured. No defensive wounds on Marcus. No evidence he ever touched Garrison's weapon. "The EMT crew chief is someone I know from my paramedic network. He told me Marcus had 3 gunshot wounds." "The report mentions 2 shots," Jordan interrupted, pulling up the official incident report on his screen. "Garrison claims he fired twice in self-defense, as Marcus allegedly lunged for his weapon." "Then where's the 3rd bullet wound?" Cole asked. "Contact wound to the head," Stefan said quietly. "Powder burns indicating the gun was pressed directly against Marcus's temple when it was fired." The booth fell silent. They all understood what that meant. The first 2 shots could potentially be explained as split-second decisions during a high-stress encounter. The 3rd shot, an execution-style contact wound delivered to a man already dying, was murder, pure and simple. "So we're not investigating an officer-involved shooting," Xavier said slowly. "We're investigating an execution." "That's exactly what we're investigating," Adrian confirmed. "Jordan, what else do we have?" "I've been digging into Garrison's background. 6 officer-involved shootings in 5 years. Marcus is number 7. Every single case was ruled justified. Every single victim was a black man. The pattern is unmistakable." Cole looked up from his own laptop where he'd been analyzing communications intercepts. "I've got something you need to see. I hacked into the Oak Ridge PD's internal communications. There's a group chat between Garrison and 5 other officers. They call themselves the Cleaners." "The Cleaners? Look at some of these messages." Cole turned his screen around so everyone could see. "This is from 3 months ago. Garrison, another one bites the dust tonight. Streets are a little cleaner." Officer Martinez, "Nice work. Drinks on me tomorrow." Officer Stevens, "How many is that this year? You're ahead of quota." Garrison, "Quality over quantity. But yeah, I'm having a good year." Quentin's hands clenched into fists on the table. "They're treating it like a game." "Because to them, it is a game," Adrian replied, his voice cold. "They know the system will protect them, so they compete to see who can kill the most people and get away with it." Jordan pulled up another file, this one showing financial records. "It gets worse. I found something interesting in Garrison's bank accounts. He's been receiving regular cash deposits that don't match his police salary. $5,000 a month for the past 2 years. Always cash, always deposited the day after a justified shooting." "Someone's paying him to kill," Xavier said. "But who?" Stefan asked. Jordan displayed a map of Oak Ridge with colored overlays showing different zones. Every one of Garrison's victims lived in areas that have been targeted for urban renewal projects. "Look at this pattern. Marcus lived on Elm Street, right in the middle of a neighborhood that's scheduled for development by a company called Oak Ridge Renaissance LLC. Development company, Cole said. Let me guess. Connected to city officials. Owned by the mayor, the police chief, and several prominent local businessmen, Jordan confirmed. I traced the financial network. Every shooting is followed within months by property purchases at below-market prices. Families traumatized by police violence selling their homes for whatever they can get. Then those properties get flipped to developers for massive profits. Adrian stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot where ordinary people were going about their ordinary lives, unaware that their city was being run by murderers. The scope of what Jordan had uncovered was staggering. This wasn't just one bad cop. This was a criminal conspiracy using police violence to clear neighborhoods for gentrification. Marcus died because someone wanted to build condos, Quentin said, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus died because he had the wrong skin color in the wrong neighborhood, Adrian corrected. The condos are just the motive. Cole had been monitoring police radio traffic while they talked. Adrian, we've got movement. Garrison just left the police station. He's headed east on Main Street. Follow him. Xavier, you're with Cole. I want to know everywhere he goes, everyone he talks to. Don't engage, just observe and document. Roger that. Jordan, keep digging into the financial network. I want to know everyone who's profiting from this scheme. Already on it. Stefan, can you reach out to your medical contacts here? We need that autopsy report as soon as it's available. I'll make some calls. Quentin, you're with me. We're going to pay a visit to Marcus's sister. The team dispersed to their assignments, each man carrying the weight of their fallen brother's memory and the determination to see justice done. They'd operated this way in combat zones around the world, gathering intelligence, methodically building a complete picture before taking action. But this mission was different. This time, they weren't fighting foreign enemies in distant lands. They were fighting corruption and racism in their own country, taking on a system that protected killers who wore badges. Adrian and Quentin drove through the quiet streets of Oak Ridge toward Elm Street, where Marcus had lived, and where his sister Claudia was now trying to process the loss of her brother. Adrian had called ahead, identifying himself as a friend from Marcus's military service, asking if they could pay their respects. The house at 2847 Elm Street was a modest two-story, with a well-maintained yard and a small American flag hanging from the front porch. Adrian could see Marcus's touch in the precise landscaping, the way every detail was carefully maintained, even though he'd only been back from Afghanistan for 2 years. Claudia Maddox answered the door before they could knock. She was in her early 40s, with Marcus's intelligent eyes and the same quiet dignity that had defined her brother. Her face showed the strain of grief, but her posture remained strong. "You must be Adrian," she said. "Marcus mentioned you in his letters, said you were the best officer he ever served under." "Yes, ma'am. This is Quentin Williams, another member of Marcus's unit. We're very sorry for your loss." Claudia stepped aside to let them in. The house was filled with the quiet preparations for tragedy. Flowers from neighbors covered dishes from friends, the phone ringing constantly with condolences that couldn't fill the Marcus-shaped hole in her world. "Can I ask you something?" Claudia said as they sat in the living room. "Did Marcus ever talk about having trouble with police?" Adrian exchanged a glance with Quentin. "What do you mean?" "I mean, was he worried about something? Because Marcus wasn't the type to get into confrontations with anyone, especially police. He was always so careful, so aware of how he needed to behave to stay safe. My brother survived 3 tours in Afghanistan. He came home missing part of his leg but alive. And then he gets killed buying coffee 3 blocks from my house by a police officer who claims Marcus threatened him." Her voice cracked on the last word, the composure finally breaking. "The police version doesn't make sense," she continued. "They're saying Marcus threatened Officer Garrison, that he tried to grab the officer's gun. But Marcus wouldn't do that. He was smarter than that, more disciplined than that. He spent 15 years following orders and giving orders. He knew how to de-escalate situations. He knew how to survive." "What exactly have the police told you?" Quentin asked gently. "Detective Williams came by this morning, said Marcus was stopped for suspicious behavior, that he became belligerent and aggressive, that Officer Garrison feared for his life and had no choice but to use deadly force. But I've known my brother for 37 years, and that's not who he was. That's not who he could ever be. Adrian leaned forward. Claudia, we want you to know that we're going to find out what really happened to Marcus. We're going to make sure the truth comes out. Are you working with the police? No, ma'am. We're working for Marcus. Claudia studied their faces, seeing something there that gave her the first spark of hope since learning of her brother's death. Marcus always said his unit was like family. He said you'd never abandon each other, not even in the worst situations. He was right about that, Quentin said quietly. Then find out who killed my brother and make sure they pay for it. Not just Officer Garrison, but everyone who helped him, everyone who protected him, everyone who made it possible for this to happen. Make them all pay. We will, Adrian promised. As they left Claudia's house, Adrian's phone buzzed with updates from the team. Jordan had identified 3 potential witnesses from traffic camera footage. Cole had intercepted police communications, suggesting that evidence from the scene was being processed in unusual ways. Xavier had found a neighborhood resident who'd heard the gunshots and seen Garrison standing over Marcus's body for several minutes before calling for backup. Most importantly, Stefan had obtained a preliminary copy of the autopsy report. 3 gunshot wounds, including the contact wound that Garrison had omitted from his report. Powder burns indicating the final shot was fired with the gun pressed directly against Marcus's head. Physical evidence that contradicted every element of Garrison's self-defense claim. We've got him, Quentin said as Adrian read through the autopsy report on his phone. We've got evidence of murder. We've got evidence, Adrian agreed. Now we need to make sure it reaches people who can't be bought or intimidated. They drove back to the truck stop where the team was reconvening, spreading their findings across the table like pieces of a puzzle. The picture was becoming clear. Marcus Richardson had been murdered by a racist cop who thought he could cover up his crime with a false report and departmental protection. But Officer Blake Garrison had made one critical mistake. He'd killed a man whose brothers never left anyone behind. The team reconvened at their temporary command post, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Oak Ridge that Cole had secured using cash and a fake ID. Jordan had already set up a digital operations center with equipment that would make most intelligence agencies jealous, multiple monitors displaying live feeds from traffic cameras, police radio frequencies, and financial data streams. Adrian, you need to see this right now, Jordan said without looking up from his keyboard. His fingers moved across the keys with machine precision, pulling up file after file. I've been digging deeper into Garrison's previous cases. This isn't just about Marcus. This is about a pattern of systematic murder. The team gathered around Jordan's primary monitor as he displayed a series of incident reports spanning 5 years. First case 18 months ago. Marcus Williams, age 24, shot during what Garrison described as a struggle for his weapon. Williams survived but was paralyzed from the waist down. No charges filed against Garrison. Jordan pulled up the next file. Second case, Darius Johnson, age 19, died in police custody after what Garrison reported as resisting arrest and falling downstairs. Medical examiner found blunt force trauma consistent with repeated beating. No charges filed against Garrison. Third case, Terrence Brown, age 31, shot during a no-knock warrant execution at the wrong address. Brown was unarmed in his pajamas, reaching for his identification when Garrison fired 4 times. No charges filed. Jesus Christ, Stefan whispered. It gets worse. Jordan continued, his voice tight with controlled rage. I found 6 incidents in 5 years where Garrison was the primary officer involved in shootings or deaths of black men. Every single case was ruled justified. Every single victim was described as threatening or non-compliant. Every single family was told their loved one died because they didn't follow simple instructions. Cole looked up from his communications monitoring station. What about internal affairs investigations? Perfunctory at best. Same investigator each time, Detective James Morrison, who happens to be Garrison's former training partner and current golf buddy. The investigations take an average of 72 hours and always conclude with the same finding. Officer Garrison acted within department policy and his use of force was justified. Xavier shook his head in disgust. So we're not just dealing with one bad cop. We're dealing with a whole system protecting a serial killer. That's exactly what we're dealing with, Adrian said grimly. Jordan, dig deeper into those previous cases. I want to know everything about the victims, the investigations, the outcomes. Already on it. But Adrian, there's something else you need to know. Jordan pulled up another file, this one showing a series of text messages. I hacked into the police department's internal communications. That group chat I mentioned earlier, the cleaners. It's not just 6 officers joking about their kills. It's a coordinated operation. He displayed the messages on the main screen where everyone could read them. Garrison had texted at 9:43 the previous night, 3 hours before Marcus died. Got a good prospect tonight, Elm Street area, should be clean and simple. Officer Martinez had responded, need backup, Garrison negative, solo work, will update after. At 10:21, 6 minutes after Marcus was shot. Package delivered, another problem solved, drinks tomorrow. Officer Stevens. You're on a roll this month, that's 3 in 6 weeks. Garrison. Quality over quantity, boys, quality over quantity. Quentin's fist slammed into the table, making the laptops jump. They're treating it like a goddamn game, like Marcus was just another score. Because to them he was, Adrian replied, his voice cold and controlled. They've been doing this for years with complete impunity. They think they're untouchable. Stefan had been reviewing medical records from the previous cases, his paramedic training making him notice details that others might miss. I got copies of autopsy reports from Garrison's other victims, same medical examiner each time, Dr. Raymond Holbrook. Same pattern of downplaying evidence that contradicts police narratives. Give me specifics, Adrian said. Darius Johnson, the kid who supposedly fell downstairs. Autopsy shows defensive wounds on his hands and arms, broken fingers consistent with trying to ward off an attack, bruising patterns that indicate he was beaten while on the ground. But Dr. Holbrook's report emphasizes the skull fracture from the fall and minimizes everything else as incidental injuries sustained during the struggle. What about Terrence Brown? Shot 4 times in the back while trying to show his ID. Bullet trajectories prove he was facing away from Garrison when he was shot. But the report focuses on the suspect's failure to comply with commands rather than the fact that he was killed while following orders to produce identification. Jordan pulled up financial records that connected directly to Stefan's findings. Dr. Holbrook receives consulting fees from Oak Ridge Renaissance LLC, $50,000 a year to serve as their medical advisor for workers' compensation claims. He's being paid by the same people who profit from these killings. So the corruption goes deeper than just the police department, Xavier observed. Much deeper, Jordan confirmed. I've traced the financial network. Oak Ridge Renaissance LLC is connected to similar development companies in 6 other cities: Detroit, Baltimore, Memphis, Phoenix, Jacksonville, and Houston. Same ownership structure, same business model, same pattern of property acquisitions following police violence in targeted neighborhoods. Cole looked up sharply from his monitoring equipment. Are you saying this is a nationwide operation? I'm saying Marcus died as part of a criminal enterprise that spans at least 6 states and generates hundreds of millions of dollars in real estate profits. The killings aren't random acts of racism or police brutality. They're calculated business decisions designed to clear neighborhoods for development. The revelation hung in the air like smoke. They'd thought they were investigating the murder of their brother by a corrupt cop. Instead, they'd uncovered something far more sinister, a systematic program of ethnic cleansing disguised as urban renewal, using police violence as a tool of economic exploitation. How many victims are we talking about? Stefan asked quietly. Jordan pulled up a spreadsheet that made everyone's blood run cold. Conservative estimate across all 6 cities, over 300 deaths or serious injuries in the past 12 years. All in predominantly black neighborhoods targeted for gentrification, all involving police officers who receive regular cash payments after their use of force incidents, all protected by departments that refuse to investigate seriously. 300 people, Quentin said, his voice barely audible. 300 families destroyed so some developers can build luxury condos. Adrian stood up and walked to the window looking out at the Oak Ridge skyline. Somewhere in one of those buildings, the people responsible for Marcus's death were going about their business confident that they'd never face consequences for what they'd done. They'd killed 300 people and gotten away with it because they'd corrupted every level of the system designed to hold them accountable. "We can't take this to local authorities," Adrian said finally. "They're all compromised. We can't trust the state police because the corruption goes that high. We need federal intervention." "FBI," Cole suggested. "Maybe. But we need to be careful about who we approach. If the wrong person gets wind of what we're doing, evidence starts disappearing and witnesses start dying." Jordan had been working on something while they talked. "I might have a solution. There's a detective in the Oak Ridge PD named Maria Santiago. According to her digital footprint, she's been filing complaints about Garrison and his crew for 2 years. Every complaint gets referred back to Detective Morrison and buried. She's tried going to the state attorney general's office twice. Both times her complaints were kicked back to local authorities. So she's trying to work within the system and getting stonewalled," Xavier said. "Exactly. Which means she might be looking for someone with the resources and skills to work outside the system." Adrian considered it carefully. "It could be a trap. If she's actually working with Garrison's crew, reaching out to her exposes our investigation." "It's a risk," Jordan agreed. "But I've read her communications. She's either the most dedicated undercover operative in history, or she's genuinely trying to stop these killings and can't find anyone who'll help her. Set up a meeting, somewhere public where we can control the approaches and exits. If it smells wrong, we abort." Jordan sent an encrypted message through a secure channel that would be difficult to trace. Within 20 minutes, he had a response. "She wants to meet at Riverside Park, East Side, in 1 hour. She says to come alone, but she knows we won't, and she's fine with that, as long as we don't bring a military squad." "She's smart," Cole observed. "Acknowledging that we'll have overwatch positions shows she understands tactical thinking." "Or it's a trap, and they're expecting us to position people around the park," Quentin countered. "Only one way to find out," Adrian said. "Quentin, you're with me. Everyone else establish overwatch and document everything. If this goes sideways, continue the mission without us." An hour later, Adrian and Quentin approached Riverside Park from different directions, using cover and concealment techniques they'd perfected in hostile territory. The park was nearly empty, except for a single woman sitting on a bench near the river, wearing civilian clothes, but carrying herself with the alert posture of someone trained in law enforcement. Adrian approached cautiously while Quentin provided overwatch from a position 50 meters away. The woman looked up as Adrian's shadow fell across her, and he could see intelligence and exhaustion in her eyes. "Detective Santiago, I'm Captain Adrian Donovan, U.S. Army Special Forces. Thank you for meeting with me." "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would." She gestured to the bench. "Please sit. We don't have much time before someone notices I'm not where I'm supposed to be." Adrian sat, but kept his posture open, ready to move if necessary. "Your message said you have information about Marcus Richardson's death." "I have information about 8 deaths," Maria corrected. Marcus Richardson was just the latest victim of a criminal conspiracy that includes the mayor, the police chief, half the city council, and at least 12 police officers. They're using police violence to clear neighborhoods for real estate development, and they've been doing it for 5 years. "Why are you telling me this instead of taking it to federal authorities?" "Because I've tried taking it to federal authorities. The FBI field office that covers this region has been investigating police misconduct in Oak Ridge for 3 years without finding anything actionable. The state attorney general's office referred my complaints back to local authorities. The system isn't broken, Captain. It's working exactly as designed to protect people like Garrison." Maria pulled out a flash drive and held it out. "This contains everything I've collected over 2 years. Financial records showing payments to officers after suspicious deaths, communications between officers coordinating their stories, witness statements that were suppressed or altered, medical evidence that contradicts official reports, enough to bring down the whole conspiracy if it reaches people who can't be bought or intimidated." Adrian took the flash drive. "Why didn't you go public with this social media anywhere that could force an investigation?" Because going public gets you dead. 3 people have tried to expose this conspiracy in the past 5 years. One died in a car accident when his brakes mysteriously failed. One committed suicide by shooting himself twice in the back of the head. One disappeared entirely, and her body was found 6 months later in a quarry outside town. I'm not suicidal, Captain. I'm strategic. I've been waiting for someone with the resources and skills to do something that actually matters. What makes you think we can do what federal authorities couldn't? Maria smiled without humor. Because federal authorities have to follow rules and procedures and chains of command. Because they have to worry about jurisdiction and evidence admissibility and political pressure. You don't. You're 6 Delta Force operators who just lost a brother to a corrupt system. You're not here to build a prosecutable case. You're here to burn down everyone responsible. You seem very certain about who we are and what we want. I'm a good detective, Captain. I've been tracking your team since you arrived in Oak Ridge yesterday morning. I know Adrian Donovan flew in from Seattle. Cole Mitchell came from Virginia Beach. Xavier Santos drove from Colorado Springs. Quentin Williams came from Tampa. Jordan Chen flew in from Austin. Stefan Novak came from Denver. I know you've been conducting surveillance on Garrison and hacking into police communications. I know you've obtained the autopsy report and identified witnesses. You're good at what you do, but this is my city, and I've been preparing for this moment for 2 years. Adrian reassessed his initial evaluation of Detective Maria Santiago. She wasn't just an honest cop trying to work within a corrupt system. She was an operator who understood intelligence gathering and strategic planning. "What do you want from us?" he asked. "I want you to do what the system won't do. I want you to get justice for Marcus Richardson and every other victim of this conspiracy. I want you to expose the corruption so completely that it can never be covered up again. And I want you to do it in a way that protects the innocent people who'll be caught in the crossfire." That's a tall order. You're Delta Force. Tall orders are what you do. Adrian's phone buzzed with a message from Jordan. 2 unmarked police cars just entered the park from the north entrance. They're trying to box you in. "We need to go," Adrian said, standing up. "How did they know about this meeting?" "They didn't, but they've been following me for 3 days, ever since they realized someone was asking questions about Marcus's death. They're paranoid and sloppy, which makes them dangerous. Come with us. If they're following you, they'll interrogate you about this meeting." "I can handle an interrogation. I've been handling them for 2 years. Besides, I'm more useful inside the department where I can feed you information and run interference." Maria stood up and held out her hand. "Good luck, Captain. Make them pay for what they did to your brother." Adrian shook her hand once, then moved quickly toward the tree line where Quentin was providing overwatch. Behind them, 2 unmarked police cars entered the park from different directions, clearly searching for someone. "We've got company," Quentin reported as Adrian reached his position. 4 officers plainclothes moving in a standard search pattern. "Let them search. We're ghosts." They moved through the park using techniques developed in hostile urban environments, staying in shadows and blind spots, never presenting a clear target or giving anyone a reason to look twice. By the time the officers reached the bench where Adrian had been sitting, Team Viper was already 3 blocks away and moving toward their command post. Back at the warehouse, Jordan immediately began analyzing the contents of Maria's flash drive. What he found exceeded their worst expectations. "This is incredible," Jordan said, pulling up file after file. "She's got everything. Bank records showing payments to officers, real estate transaction records proving the connection between killings and property acquisitions, internal communications discussing specific targets, medical reports that contradict official autopsy findings, witness statements that were never included in case files. This is enough to bring federal RICO charges against everyone involved." "How solid is the evidence?" Adrian asked. "Solid enough that any competent federal prosecutor could get convictions on 90% of these cases. The paper trail is meticulously documented. Maria Santiago didn't just collect evidence. She built an entire case file." Cole looked up from his monitoring station, his expression grim. "We've got a problem. I'm picking up increased police communications. They're talking about outside agitators asking questions about the Richardson shooting. They know we're here. Do they know who we are? Not yet. But Chief Brennan just authorized overtime for additional patrols in neighborhoods where we've been operating. They're also talking about enhanced security measures around potential witnesses. Enhanced security measures, Xavier translated. Intimidation. Exactly. Stefan had been reviewing the medical files from Maria's flash drive. Adrian, there's something in here you need to see. Dr. Holbrook's autopsy report on Marcus isn't just biased, it's criminally false. He lists cause of death as gunshot wounds sustained during confrontation with law enforcement. But his own notes, which he probably thought were private, tell a different story. What story? His notes describe a contact wound to the head with powder burns and stippling consistent with execution-style killing. He documented it, then omitted it from the official report. He knew Marcus was murdered, documented the evidence, and then helped cover it up. Quentin stood up abruptly, his fists clenched. So everyone knows. The medical examiner knows. The investigators know. The department knows. They all know Garrison murdered Marcus in cold blood, and they're all working together to protect him. That's exactly what's happening, Adrian confirmed, which means we can't trust anyone in the local system. We need to go federal, but we need to be strategic about who we approach. Jordan had been working on something while they talked. I think I found our way in. There's an FBI special agent named Rebecca Torres who works in the Philadelphia field office. She's part of the public corruption unit and has a track record of actually prosecuting bad cops. More importantly, she's not connected to the local network. She transferred from the Los Angeles office 6 months ago. How do we know she's not compromised? We don't. But Maria's flash drive includes communications that mention Torres by name. Garrison and his crew are worried about her. They've been trying to get her reassigned or discredited because she doesn't play by the usual rules. If they're worried about her, that's a good sign, Cole observed. Adrian made his decision. Reach out to Torres. Use secure channels that can't be traced back to us. Send her enough information to prove we're legitimate, but not so much that we expose our full investigation if she's compromised. Jordan's fingers flew across his keyboard. Sending now. I'm including the autopsy report showing the contact wound financial records linking Garrison to Oak Ridge Renaissance LLC and excerpts from the Cleaners Group chat. If she's legitimate, this should be enough to get her attention. How long until we hear back? If she's good at her job, 24 hours maximum. If she's part of the problem, we'll know, because Garrison and his crew will start destroying evidence. Cole's monitoring equipment suddenly crackled with urgent radio traffic. Adrian, we've got movement. Multiple units responding to a reported suspicious vehicle in the warehouse district. This district. Someone called in our location. Pack everything. We're relocating now. The team moved with practiced efficiency, breaking down equipment and loading it into vehicles within minutes. They'd operated in hostile environments long enough to know that staying in one location too long was asking for trouble. As they pulled away from the warehouse, they could see police lights in the distance, multiple vehicles converging on the area they'd just vacated. That was too close, Xavier said from the driver's seat. That was intentional, Adrian corrected. They're testing us, seeing how we react, trying to figure out who we are and what we're capable of. So what do? We show them exactly what we're capable of. Jordan was already monitoring communications from his laptop in the back seat. Garrison just got a call on his personal phone. He's being told to activate something called Blackwater Protocol. What's Blackwater Protocol? Stefan asked. Jordan pulled up more files from Maria's flash drive. According to her notes, it's a contingency plan for when the conspiracy faces federal investigation. It involves simultaneous attacks on investigators, witnesses, and evidence repositories. They create enough chaos and casualties that the original crimes get lost in the aftermath. They're planning to attack federal agents, Quentin said incredulously. They're planning to attack federal agents and blame it on anti-police terrorists. Us. Adrian felt cold certainty settle over him. This wasn't just about Marcus anymore. This was about preventing Garrison and his conspiracy from murdering federal investigators and using Team Viper as scapegoats. New mission, Adrian announced. We protect Agent Torres and her team when they arrive. We document everything Garrison tries to do, and we make sure the real criminals face justice, not the people trying to stop them. How do we protect federal agents without revealing ourselves? Cole asked. We don't hide anymore. We step into the light and dare them to come after us. Jordan's laptop chimed with an incoming message. Adrian Torres responded. She wants to meet tomorrow morning, says she's bringing a task force to execute search warrants on the Oak Ridge Police Department. Tell her to be careful. Tell her Garrison's crew is planning an ambush disguised as a terrorist attack. Already sending the warning. As they drove through the dark streets of Oak Ridge, Adrian looked at his team, 5 men who'd followed him through impossible situations and were following him now into a war against their own countrymen. They'd come to avenge Marcus Richardson's death. Now they were trying to prevent a massacre. The mission had changed, but the objective remained the same: justice for Marcus and protection for innocent people who couldn't protect themselves. Officer Blake Garrison sat in his car outside Murphy's Tavern, reading the encrypted message on his phone for the 3rd time. Blackwater Protocol. The words that meant everything was about to go to hell. Federal agents were coming, and they weren't coming to ask polite questions. They were coming with warrants and task forces and the kind of firepower that ended careers and sent people to prison. He looked at his phone again at the message from Deputy Assistant Attorney General Patricia Morrison, Detective Morrison's aunt, and another link in the chain that protected their operation. Federal raid scheduled for 0800 tomorrow. Eliminate all evidence and witnesses. Authorization for extreme measures granted. This is your war now. Garrison smiled in the darkness. If they wanted war, he'd give them war. And when the smoke cleared, Team Viper would be dead, the federal agents would be dead, and he'd be a hero who tried to save them all. He had no idea that 6 men were watching him from 3 different locations, documenting his every move, listening to his every communication, preparing to bring down everything he'd built. The hunter had become the hunted, and the reckoning was coming. The federal agents arrived in Oak Ridge at dawn, their black SUVs rolling through the quiet streets like a declaration of war. FBI Special Agent Rebecca Torres led a joint task force that included investigators from the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division, the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, and the DEA's Public Corruption Unit. They came armed with search warrants, seizure orders, and the kind of evidence that Detective Maria Santiago and Team Viper had been carefully feeding to federal authorities for the past week. Chief Harold Brennan watched the convoy from his office window, his hands shaking as he reached for his secure phone. The call he'd made to Washington 3 days earlier had been intended to shut down the investigation before it could gain momentum. Instead, it had accelerated everything. "They're here," he said into the phone, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "I know," came the reply from Deputy Assistant Attorney General Patricia Morrison. "The situation has moved beyond our control. You need to activate the contingency plan now." "What contingency plan? You said this would go away. You said your contacts would handle it." "That was before 6 Delta Force operators decided to wage war against our entire operation. The contingency plan is simple. This becomes a terrorist attack by anti-government extremists who targeted local police officers. Garrison and his team become heroes who died defending their community and trying to protect federal agents." Brennan felt ice water flood his veins. "You're talking about killing federal agents." "I'm talking about protecting a network that generates millions of dollars in revenue and employs hundreds of people across 6 states. Garrison's operation in Oak Ridge is just one piece of a much larger enterprise. We have similar operations in Detroit, Baltimore, Memphis, Phoenix, Jacksonville, and Houston. Each one generates between 5 and 15 million annually in development opportunities." The scope of the revelation hit Brennan like a physical blow. What he'd thought was a local arrangement between corrupt cops and greedy developers was actually a nationwide criminal enterprise using police violence to clear neighborhoods for gentrification. "How long has this been going on?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. 12 years. We've processed over 300 properties across 6 states. The Oak Ridge operation was actually one of our smaller pilots. And the victims, acceptable losses in service of urban renewal and economic development. Every major city has populations that need to be relocated to make room for progress. We're just more efficient about it than most. While Brennan absorbed this information, Special Agent Torres was conducting her first briefing with the federal task force in the parking lot of a hotel 3 miles from the police station. She held a tablet containing digital evidence that Jordan Chen had carefully compiled and transmitted through Detective Santiago's contacts. "We have financial records showing systematic payments to police officers following suspicious deaths," Torres announced to her team, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd built dozens of successful prosecutions. "We have recorded communications discussing the planning and execution of murders. We have medical evidence of cover-ups and falsified reports. And we have testimony from witnesses who have been intimidated into silence." Agent Marcus Sullivan from the DEA studied the evidence files on his own tablet. How reliable are our sources? Multiple independent sources, all corroborated by electronic surveillance and documentary evidence. Whoever compiled this intelligence is extremely professional. The methodology suggests military or intelligence background. Federal agents? Unknown, but the evidence is organized like an operational brief. Target profiles, financial analysis, communications intercepts, tactical assessments. Someone with serious training put this together. Torres pulled up the financial analysis that Jordan had prepared, showing the intricate web of payments and property transfers. Look at this pattern. Every police shooting in targeted neighborhoods was followed within 6 months by property acquisitions at below market prices. The same development company, Oak Ridge Renaissance LLC, acquired properties in every case. "How much money are we talking about?" asked Agent Lisa Rodriguez from the Justice Department. "Conservative estimate for Oak Ridge alone, $50 million over 5 years. But the financial network suggests this is replicated in multiple cities. We could be looking at a criminal enterprise worth hundreds of millions." Torres didn't know that 50 yards away, Cole Darnell was monitoring their communications from a surveillance van and relaying updates to Team Viper. She didn't know that Jordan Chen had already hacked into the federal database systems and was tracking the investigation's progress in real time. Most importantly, she didn't know that Adrian Donovan and his team were positioning themselves around the police station, preparing for the violent response they knew was coming. Because Team Viper understood something that the federal agents didn't. Men who had committed murder for money wouldn't hesitate to kill federal investigators to protect their enterprise. At 8:47 in the morning, the federal task force entered the Oak Ridge Police Department with search warrants for financial records, communications data, and evidence from previous officer-involved shootings. They were met by Chief Brennan and a phalanx of lawyers who immediately began filing motions to suppress evidence and challenge federal jurisdiction. "Chief Brennan," Torres said, her voice professional but hard, "we're here to investigate allegations of civil rights violations and financial crimes. Your cooperation would be appreciated." "My officers are being targeted by a coordinated attack on law enforcement," Brennan replied, his prepared statement delivered with practiced indignation. "We have evidence of anti-government extremists threatening police personnel and their families." "What evidence?" Brennan produced a file containing what appeared to be threatening letters and social media posts directed at Oak Ridge police officers. Torres examined the documents with growing skepticism. The language patterns were inconsistent, the timing was suspicious, and the technical details suggested they'd been fabricated by someone with law enforcement training. "These appear to be manufactured," Torres observed, holding up one of the letters. "The metadata shows they were created yesterday, not over the period of weeks they're supposed to represent." "Are you calling me a liar?" "I'm saying these documents don't pass forensic analysis, Chief, which makes me wonder what you're trying to hide." At 8:52, Officer Blake Garrison received a text message on his encrypted phone. "Federal raid in progress. Activate Blackwater Protocol. Eliminate all witnesses and evidence." Garrison gathered the cleaners at a predetermined location, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town that had been prepared for exactly this scenario. The building contained weapons, ammunition, body armor, and communications equipment that wouldn't be traced back to official police channels. "The feds are trying to destroy us," Garrison announced to his team, his voice carrying the righteous anger of someone who genuinely believed he was the victim. They're using fabricated evidence from anti-police terrorists to justify an attack on law enforcement. Officer Martinez checked his weapon, a military-grade assault rifle that had been purchased through a network of corrupt weapons dealers. What's the plan? We defend ourselves and our community. The terrorists who've been targeting us are going to attempt an attack on the federal agents at the police station. We respond as law enforcement officers defending federal personnel from domestic terrorism. Officer Stevens was reviewing tactical maps of the police station and surrounding area. How do we make it look like a terrorist attack? Simple. We dress in civilian clothes, use non-police weapons, and attack from outside while the feds are inside conducting their illegal raid. When backup arrives, we're the heroic officers who responded to defend federal agents from anti-government extremists. Officer Parks looked uncomfortable, doubt creeping into his expression. What about the extremists themselves, the people who've been investigating us? They get eliminated during the rescue attempt. Tragic casualties of terrorism. We'll plant manifesto materials and weapons to support the narrative. It was a carefully constructed plan that would frame Team Viper as terrorists and the cleaners as heroes who died protecting federal agents from attack. The plan required killing the federal investigators in a way that looked like rescue attempts, eliminating Team Viper as witnesses, and destroying evidence that contradicted the official story. What Garrison didn't know was that Xavier Morales had been monitoring their communications and was relaying their plans to both the federal task force and Team Viper in real time. "Adrian, we've got a massive problem." Xavier's voice came through the encrypted radio. "Garrison's team is planning to attack the federal agents and frame us for it." Details. They're calling it Blackwater Protocol. Simultaneous assault on the police station while federal agents are inside, then blame us for the attack. They've got military-grade weapons and enough firepower to kill everyone in that building. Adrian felt the familiar calm that came over him in combat situations. This was no longer an investigation or a pressure campaign. This was war, and the enemy had just declared their intention to kill federal agents and innocent bystanders to protect their criminal enterprise. Timeline: 20 minutes maximum. They're loading weapons and equipment now. "All units, we have a new mission," Adrian announced over the team channel. "We protect the federal agents and ensure the real criminals face justice. Rules of engagement." "Whatever it takes to stop them," Quentin responded immediately. "These bastards are planning to murder federal agents and frame us for terrorism." "Agreed," Cole added. "We didn't come here to watch more people die." As Team Viper repositioned around the police station, federal agents inside were discovering the full scope of the corruption they were investigating. Financial records showed payments totaling over $2 million to various police officers over the past 5 years. Communications intercepts revealed planning discussions for specific murders. Medical files contained evidence of systematic cover-ups involving coroners, prosecutors, and judges. "This isn't just police corruption," Torres told her team, her voice tight with controlled anger. "This is organized crime using law enforcement as a front operation." Sullivan was reviewing communications intercepts when he discovered something that made his blood run cold. "Torres, look at this. They're not just killing people in Oak Ridge. This network has operations in 6 other cities." The evidence showed a criminal enterprise that spanned state lines involving hundreds of corrupt officials and generating hundreds of millions of dollars through systematic murder and real estate manipulation. Each city had its own version of the cleaners' police officers, who eliminated residents of neighborhoods targeted for development. Detroit, Baltimore, Memphis, Phoenix, Jacksonville, Houston, Rodriguez read from the list. Same pattern in every city. Police violence clearing neighborhoods for gentrification. Torres realized they were dealing with something far larger than local police corruption. This was a criminal conspiracy that had infiltrated law enforcement agencies across multiple states using police power to commit crimes that generated massive profits for a network of corrupt developers, politicians, and law enforcement officials. An urgent message came through on Sullivan's radio, the voice unidentified, but the information specific enough to be credible. "All federal personnel, we have intelligence of an imminent attack on your location. Unknown number of hostiles approaching with military-grade weapons. Recommend immediate evacuation." The message came from Detective Santiago, who was serving as liaison between Team Viper and federal authorities. She'd been monitoring police communications and knew that Garrison's team was 15 minutes away from the station. "How credible is this intelligence?" Torres asked, her hand instinctively moving toward her service weapon. "Multiple sources confirmed," Santiago replied over the radio. "Local officers involved in the corruption investigation are planning to eliminate federal personnel and destroy evidence. They have automatic weapons and explosive devices." Torres made the decision that saved lives. "All units we evacuate immediately. Take all evidence and personnel to secondary location. Move now." "What about the investigation?" Rodriguez asked as they began the emergency evacuation. "We continue it from a secure location, but we're not going to let corrupt cops murder federal agents to protect their criminal enterprise." As federal agents began their emergency evacuation, loading evidence boxes and equipment into their vehicles with practiced efficiency, Garrison's assault team was approaching the police station in 3 vehicles armed with automatic weapons and explosives. Their plan was to storm the building, kill the federal agents' plant evidence, suggesting a terrorist attack, and position themselves as the heroic first responders who tried to save federal lives. Officer Martinez had acquired military-grade explosives through contacts in the weapons trafficking network that supplied corrupt police departments. Officer Stevens had brought automatic weapons that were supposed to have been used by anti-government extremists. Officer Parks carried identification documents and manifesto materials that would be planted on bodies to support the terrorism narrative. The plan fell apart when they arrived to find the building empty, except for a few terrified civilian employees who had nothing to do with law enforcement. "Where are the feds?" Martinez demanded, grabbing a secretary by the arm and yanking her toward him. "They left," she cried, her voice shaking with terror. "They all left 20 minutes ago with all their files and computers." Garrison felt his carefully constructed operation collapsing. The federal agents were gone, the evidence was gone, and somehow law enforcement agencies with unlimited resources knew about operations that were supposed to be completely secret. His radio crackled with an incoming transmission. "Unit 247, this is FBI Special Agent Rebecca Torres. We know about Blackwater Protocol. We know about the planned attack. We know about the multi-state criminal enterprise. Surrender now, and you might live through this." The transmission was being broadcast on all police frequencies, ensuring that every officer in the region could hear the federal government formally accusing local police of planning to murder federal agents and operating a criminal conspiracy across state lines. "How do they know?" Parks whispered, his face pale with fear. "Someone's been feeding them information," Stevens said, his voice tight with panic. "Someone with access to our communications, our plans, our financial records." Garrison's phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Patricia Morrison. "Operation compromised. Eliminate all witnesses and evidence. Activate Scorched Earth Protocol." Scorched Earth Protocol meant killing everyone who could testify against the network, destroying all physical evidence, and disappearing into identities that had been prepared for exactly this scenario. It was the final option, the one that ended with bodies and fire and the complete destruction of everything they'd built. "New plan," Garrison announced, his voice hard. "We find whoever's been working with the feds and we eliminate them, then we disappear." "Garrison, this is Captain Adrian Donovan, U.S. Army Special Forces." A new voice came over the radio, calm and controlled and carrying absolute authority. "You murdered my brother, Marcus Richardson. You murdered 7 other innocent people. You plan to murder federal agents. It's over." The pieces finally clicked for Garrison. The military officer who had disrupted his plan to kill Marcus Thompson weeks earlier wasn't a random witness. He was part of an organized operation targeting the cleaners. The investigation, the evidence, the federal response, all of it had been orchestrated by people with military training and professional capability. "Where are you, Wolf?" Garrison snarled into his radio, his composure finally cracking. "We are everywhere. We've been watching you for days. We know about your financial accounts, your communication networks, your safe houses. We know about Oak Ridge Renaissance LLC and the people paying you to commit murder." As if to prove the point, Garrison's phone buzzed with a text message containing photographs of his bank statements, copies of his encrypted communications GPS coordinates of every location he'd visited in the past week, and detailed dossiers on every member of the criminal network. "You want to end this," Garrison broadcast, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "Meet me at the old steel mill on Factory Road. Just you and me." "Negative," Adrian replied. "You're going to surrender to federal authorities and face trial for your crimes. I'm not going to prison for doing my job. Your job was to serve and protect. You chose to become a serial killer for hire. I was cleaning up the streets. I was making communities safe for decent people. You were murdering innocent people for real estate profits. There's a difference." The radio exchange was being monitored by news media, federal agents, and police departments across the region. Garrison's own words were being broadcast live, confirming his guilt and destroying any possibility of claiming innocence or victimhood. Stefan's voice came through Team Viper's encrypted channel. "Adrian, I'm monitoring emergency medical frequencies. They're calling for multiple ambulances and trauma teams to stand by. Whatever Garrison's planning, he's expecting casualties." "Copy that. All units maintain defensive positions and protect civilian areas." Jordan's voice joined the channel. "I'm tracking their vehicles through traffic cameras. They're splitting up, trying to create multiple engagement zones. They want to draw us out." "Understood. Do not let them reach populated areas. This ends now, but it ends where civilians won't get caught in the crossfire." What happened next unfolded with a precision that only comes from professional military training facing desperate criminals with nothing left to lose. Garrison and his team attempted to flee Oak Ridge, but found their escape routes blocked by federal agents who had been positioned based on intelligence provided by Team Viper. They attempted to fight their way out using military-grade weapons, but discovered that 6 Delta Force veterans with superior training equipment and tactical support were not the same as the unarmed civilians they'd been murdering for years. The firefight lasted 14 minutes and covered 3 city blocks. Officer Martinez was killed when he attempted to use explosives against a federal vehicle and detonated them prematurely, the blast catching him and destroying his own cover position. Officer Stevens was critically wounded during a running gun battle with Adrian and Quinton, who used superior marksmanship and tactical movement to outflank his position and disable him with precise shots that left him alive but unable to continue fighting. Officer Parks surrendered after his vehicle was disabled by gunfire that punched through the engine block but left him unharmed, his hands shaking as he threw his weapon out the window and emerged with his hands raised. Garrison himself was pinned down in an abandoned building with federal agents surrounding him, and Adrian Donovan speaking to him through a megaphone, his voice carrying across the empty street. "Blake Garrison, this is your final opportunity to surrender. Come out with your hands visible and no weapons. Go to hell, Wolf. You killed 8 innocent people. You planned to kill federal agents. You turned law enforcement into organized crime. It's over. I was doing my job. I was cleaning up the streets. You were committing murder for money. Those people you killed had names, families, futures. Marcus Richardson was a decorated veteran buying coffee. Darius Johnson was a teenager walking home from work. Terrence Brown was a father reaching for his ID. They were innocent people you killed for real estate profits." The standoff continued for another hour, with Garrison alternating between threats, justifications, and desperate attempts to negotiate. He offered to testify against his superiors, to reveal the full scope of the corruption network, to provide evidence against politicians and developers who had paid for the killings. "I can give you names," Garrison shouted from his position inside the building. "I can give you bank accounts. I can give you the whole network. This goes all the way to Washington." "We already have the whole network," Adrian replied, his voice calm and implacable. "We've been building this case for weeks. You think you're the only one who kept records? You think you're the only one who documented everything? You think you've won something here? You think this ends with me? There are networks in 50 cities doing exactly what we did here. You've stopped one operation in one town. Then we'll stop the others too. You can't stop them all. Watch us." But Adrian knew Garrison was right about the scope of the problem. The evidence they'd gathered showed criminal networks in multiple states protected by corrupt officials at every level of government. Stopping the Oak Ridge operation was just the beginning of a much larger war. The final assault was conducted by federal agents with Team Viper, providing tactical support and overwatch. Garrison was taken alive wounded, but breathing still ranting about federal conspiracies and anti-police terrorists, even as paramedics worked to save his life. "You don't understand what you've done," he said, as they loaded him onto a stretcher, his voice weak but venomous. "This goes all the way to Washington. You've declared war on people who own judges, senators, federal agents. They'll destroy you for this." "Good," Adrian replied, standing over the stretcher with his arms crossed. "We're used to fighting enemies with superior resources." As the ambulance carrying Garrison drove away under federal escort, Adrian stood in the parking lot of the abandoned building where the standoff had occurred. Around him, federal agents were processing evidence, interviewing witnesses, and coordinating with prosecutors who would spend years unraveling the full scope of the criminal conspiracy. Jordan approached with his laptop, showing Adrian the media coverage that was already spreading across the internet like wildfire. "It's working. The story is going national. Other victims' families are coming forward. Federal investigations are being opened in 6 other cities." "Good," Adrian said, his voice tired but satisfied. "Marcus deserves to know his death wasn't in vain." Stefan joined them, his medical gear still strapped to his vest. "What about the other victims? The families who have been waiting years for justice?" "They're going to get it," Adrian replied. "The federal agents have everything they need to prosecute the entire network." Quinton emerged from the building where Garrison had made his final stand, holding up a blood-stained notebook. "Found something you need to see. Garrison kept records. Names, dates, payments, victim profiles, everything." Adrian took the notebook and flipped through pages of meticulous handwriting, documenting 5 years of systematic murder. Each entry showed the same pattern: target identification, payment authorization, execution, cover-up. 8 families destroyed for real estate profits. But the notebook contained more than just records of Oak Ridge operations. It included contact information for similar networks in other cities, financial details for the larger criminal enterprise, and operational protocols that could be used to identify and prosecute corrupt officers nationwide. "Make sure this gets to Torres," Adrian said, handing the notebook to Jordan. "Let her see how their justified shootings were really planned assassinations." Cole approached with communications equipment still strapped to his back. "I've been monitoring federal channels. They're coordinating simultaneous raids in Detroit, Baltimore, Memphis, Phoenix, Jacksonville, and Houston. The whole network is coming down." "How many people are we talking about?" Xavier asked. "Conservative estimate 300 corrupt officials across 6 states, maybe more when they start flipping on each other to save themselves." As Team Viper prepared to leave Oak Ridge, they knew their work wasn't finished. Garrison had been right about one thing. There were similar operations in other cities, other networks of corrupt officials using police violence to advance private interests. But they also knew that something had changed. The conspiracy that had seemed untouchable just days earlier was now exposed, dismantled, facing federal prosecution across multiple states. The victims who had been dismissed as criminals were now recognized as what they really were: innocent people murdered by a system that was supposed to protect them. Marcus Richardson was still dead. Nothing could change that, but his death had revealed a network of corruption that would never again operate in darkness. His murder had sparked a reckoning that would protect countless future victims from the same fate. The war for justice was far from over, but this battle was won. 6 months after the shootout that ended Blake Garrison's killing spree, Arlington National Cemetery was draped in the golden light of an October morning. The ceremony, taking place in Section 60, where America's newest heroes rest among the honored dead, was unlike any funeral the cemetery had ever hosted. Marcus Richardson was finally coming home. The Army Honor Guard moved with precision perfected through countless ceremonies, but today their movements carried an extra weight of solemnity. This wasn't just another military funeral. This was the burial of a soldier whose death had exposed a criminal conspiracy spanning 6 states and saved countless future victims from the same fate. Captain Adrian Donovan stood at attention beside the flag-draped casket wearing his dress blues and the decorations he'd earned in 15 years of service. Beside him stood the 5 other members of Team Viper men who had dropped everything to seek justice for their fallen brother. They'd accomplished their mission, but the victory felt hollow in the shadow of Marcus's death. The congregation included an unusual mixture of military personnel, federal agents, civil rights leaders, and families of other victims who had found justice because of Marcus's sacrifice. Agent Rebecca Torres sat in the front row, representing the federal task force that had prosecuted the largest police corruption case in American history. Detective Maria Santiago wore her dress uniform, having been promoted to lieutenant and assigned to head the new Civil Rights Investigation Unit within the Pennsylvania State Police. But the most important attendees were Marcus's family and the families of the 7 other victims whose murders had been exposed during the investigation. Claudia Maddox sat in the front row holding her 8-year-old daughter Destiny's hand as they said goodbye to the uncle who had been taken from them by men who saw his life as an obstacle to profit. The chaplain's words carried across the cemetery as he spoke about sacrifice, honor, and the eternal bond between soldiers who served together. But for Team Viper, the most meaningful part of the ceremony came when each member stepped forward to place a medal on Marcus's casket decorations he'd earned but never received because his military records had been lost in bureaucratic shuffling. Bronze Star with valor for actions in Kandahar, Purple Heart for wounds received in service, Combat Infantry Badge for engaging the enemy in ground combat, Distinguished Service Cross for extraordinary heroism in action against an armed enemy. Each medal represented moments when Marcus had risked his life to protect others, moments that seemed even more significant now that they knew how his life had ended. Adrian was the last to approach the casket. In his hands, he carried Marcus's final decoration, the Medal of Honor that Congress had authorized posthumously, not for his military service, but for the impact his death had on exposing corruption and protecting future victims. It was an unprecedented award, recognizing a civilian contribution that had military implications for justice and national security. Sergeant First Class Marcus Richardson, Adrian said softly, his voice carrying to the assembled mourners. Your final mission is complete. The brothers you protected, the families you saved, the corruption you exposed. Your service continues, even in death. He placed the Medal of Honor on the casket and stepped back. His eyes burning with tears he refused to let fall until he was alone. As the honor guard began folding the American flag with movements so precise they seemed choreographed, Adrian thought about the journey that had brought them here. From that terrible phone call 6 months ago to standing in Arlington Cemetery with justice served and honor restored. When the ceremony was complete, the flag was presented to Claudia with the words that have comforted military families for generations. On behalf of the President of the United States Army, and a grateful nation, please accept this flag as a symbol of our appreciation for your loved one's honorable and faithful service. But the flag wasn't the only symbol presented that day. Agent Torres approached Claudia with a letter signed by the Attorney General of the United States, formally acknowledging that Marcus Richardson had died as a victim of criminal conspiracy, not as a suspect in a justified police shooting. The letter apologized for the system's failure to protect him and promised that his death would serve as a catalyst for reforms that would prevent similar tragedies. After the burial ceremony, the attendees gathered at a reception where the full scope of what Marcus's death had accomplished became clear. The investigation that started with his murder had resulted in the prosecution of over 300 corrupt officials across 6 states. The criminal enterprise that had generated hundreds of millions of dollars through systematic murder and real estate manipulation had been completely dismantled. Officer Blake Garrison was serving life in prison without the possibility of parole, having been convicted on 8 counts of first-degree murder, plus conspiracy charges that carried additional life sentences. His confession, obtained during plea negotiations to avoid the death penalty, had provided federal prosecutors with evidence that led to convictions throughout the criminal network. Chief Harold Brennan was awaiting trial on federal racketeering charges, facing a potential death sentence for his role in ordering attacks on federal agents. Mayor Patricia Hawkins had been convicted of conspiracy and was serving 25 years in federal prison. The developers who had profited from the scheme were facing civil lawsuits that would cost them hundreds of millions in damages to victims' families. But the most significant changes weren't in the courtroom. They were in the communities that had been terrorized by corrupt police. The Oak Ridge Police Department had been disbanded and replaced with a new agency that included community oversight, mandatory body cameras, and psychological screening designed to identify officers with violent tendencies. Similar reforms had been implemented in every city where the corruption network had operated. Detective Maria Santiago approached Team Viper during the reception, carrying news that would shape their future missions. "I've been asked to extend an invitation from the Justice Department. They want to create a new task force specifically designed to investigate police corruption and civil rights violations. Professional investigators with military backgrounds working directly for federal authorities, targeting cases that local law enforcement can't or won't handle properly." Adrian looked around at his team, seeing the same question in their eyes that he was asking himself. They had accomplished their mission in Oak Ridge, but Garrison had been right about one thing. There were similar networks operating in cities across the country. "What would that look like?" Adrian asked carefully. "Federal badges, unlimited resources authority to investigate any law enforcement agency in the country. You'd be working cases like this one: systematic corruption, civil rights violations, criminal conspiracies involving police departments. The kind of work that requires people who understand tactical operations and aren't afraid to take on powerful enemies." And Stefan looked interested, his paramedic training making him think about all the victims they could help. Legal authority to do what we've been doing unofficially. Full legal authority with the backing of the Justice Department and direct access to federal prosecutors. No more operating in the shadows. No more wondering if what you're doing is legal. Everything above board and sanctioned. Quentin nodded slowly, remembering the terror in Marcus Thompson's eyes when they'd told him he was targeted for execution. "Sounds like the kind of mission Marcus would have wanted us to accept." "The offer extends to all of you," Santiago continued. "Team Viper could become the core of a new kind of law enforcement Unit 1 designed specifically to police the police." Jordan was already thinking about the technical capabilities they could bring to such a unit. Access to federal surveillance systems, digital forensics, financial investigations. Everything we needed in Oak Ridge but had to obtain through questionable methods. Cole smiled for the first time in months. Garrison was right about one thing. We can't stop them all, but we can stop a hell of a lot more with federal badges than we could as civilians. Xavier looked toward Marcus's grave, visible in the distance through the trees. "What would Marcus say about us becoming federal agents?" "He'd say the mission comes first," Adrian replied without hesitation. "And the mission is protecting innocent people from the people who are supposed to protect them." As the reception wound down, families of the other victims approached Team Viper to express their gratitude. Darius Johnson's mother, whose son had been beaten to death in police custody, thanked them for proving that her boy hadn't died because he was a criminal. He died because he owned property that someone else wanted. Terrence Brown's widow, whose husband had been shot while showing his identification to police, finally had closure and a substantial settlement that would provide for her children's education. She held Adrian's hand and told him that her husband would have wanted his death to mean something to protect other families from the same pain. But the most moving conversation came from Marcus Thompson, the man whose life Team Viper had saved by interrupting Garrison's planned execution. He approached Adrian with tears in his eyes and a story about the life he'd lived in the 6 months since that terrible night. "I think about it a lot," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "How close I came to dying for the crime of existing while black in a neighborhood someone wanted to develop. I sold the house, got fair market value for it, not the below-market offers that other families received after their relatives were killed. Used the money to buy a place in a different state, start fresh, where nobody knows me as the guy who almost got murdered by corrupt cops." "That's probably smart," Adrian agreed. "But here's the thing. I shouldn't have to leave my hometown to be safe from police. Nobody should have to live with that fear. That's why I came today to thank you for saving my life, but also to tell you that if you keep doing this work, you're going to save hundreds more lives, thousands maybe. We're planning to keep working, Adrian told him. Marcus Richardson's death started something that's bigger than any of us. Good, because there are a lot of people out there who need you, a lot of families who need to know that someone's watching, someone's fighting, someone cares enough to take on the bastards who think they're untouchable. As Team Viper prepared to leave Arlington National Cemetery, they stopped at Marcus's grave one final time. The headstone was simple but meaningful. Sergeant First Class Marcus Richardson, Medal of Honor recipient, beloved brother, protector of the innocent. "So what now?" Stefan asked, breaking the silence that had settled over the group. "Now we go back to work," Adrian replied, his voice steady despite the grief that still threatened to overwhelm him. "But this time, we do it with badges and legal authority." "Think we can make a difference?" Cole asked. "I think Marcus already showed us we can make a difference. The question is, how many more families we can protect by continuing his mission?" Jordan pulled out his phone and showed them a news article that had just been published. "Look at this. The Oak Ridge investigation has inspired similar federal investigations in 12 other cities. Families who thought their relatives' deaths would never be investigated are finally getting answers." "Marcus's influence is spreading," Cole observed quietly. "His sacrifice is multiplying," Adrian corrected. "Every family that gets justice, every corrupt cop that gets prosecuted, every community that gets reformed, that's Marcus's legacy continuing." Quentin looked at the Medal of Honor symbol engraved on Marcus's headstone. "Think he'd be proud of what we accomplished?" "I think he'd be proud that we finished the mission," Adrian said. "And I think he'd want us to accept those federal badges and keep protecting people who can't protect themselves." As they walked away from the grave team, Viper was already planning their next mission. The invitation from the Justice Department represented an opportunity to apply their skills on a national scale to take the lessons learned in Oak Ridge and use them to protect communities across the country. 6 months later, the headlines told the story of their success. Federal Task Force dismantles police corruption network in Chicago. Detroit Police Department faces federal oversight after task force investigation. Memphis officials convicted in federal civil rights case. Each headline represented families who got justice, communities that became safer, and corrupt officials who learned that badges and connections couldn't protect them from federal investigators with military training and unlimited resources. The new task force worked out of a secure facility in Washington, D.C., with field offices in major cities across the country. They handled cases that local law enforcement couldn't or wouldn't investigate, targeting systematic corruption with the same precision they'd once applied to military operations. Adrian Donovan, now special agent in charge of the Federal Police Accountability Task Force, kept a photograph of Marcus Richardson on his desk. Not the formal military portrait, but a candid shot of Marcus laughing with his niece at a family barbecue. A reminder of the human cost of corruption and the innocent lives that depended on their success. Cole Mitchell ran the communications division, using his skills to intercept evidence and coordinate operations across multiple jurisdictions. Xavier Santos headed the tactical response team, training new agents in the kind of precision operations that had made Team Viper legendary. Quentin Williams worked undercover operations, infiltrating corrupt police departments and gathering evidence from the inside. Jordan Chen managed digital forensics and cyber investigations, tracking financial crimes and communications that other agencies couldn't penetrate. Stefan Novak led the victim support division, working with families and providing the kind of comprehensive care that honored both his medical training and his commitment to justice. The mission that had started with a disabled veteran buying coffee in a gas station had become a nationwide campaign for justice. Marcus's death had exposed a criminal enterprise, saved countless future victims, and created a new model for investigating police misconduct. 1 year after Marcus's funeral, Team Viper gathered at his grave again for the anniversary. Claudia and Destiny were there too, along with families of other victims whose cases they'd helped solve in the months since Oak Ridge. "Uncle Marcus would be so proud," Destiny said, looking up at Adrian with the same intelligent eyes her uncle had possessed. "Mommy says he's watching over all of us now." "He is," Adrian agreed, kneeling down to her level. And he's watching over every family we help, every person we protect, every corrupt cop we put in prison. That's his legacy. Claudia placed flowers on her brother's grave, her hand lingering on the headstone. A year ago, I thought Marcus died for nothing. I thought the system that killed him would protect itself and nothing would change. I was wrong. You weren't wrong to be angry, Adrian told her. You were wrong to think we'd let his death be meaningless. Thank you for that. Thank you for making sure my brother's sacrifice mattered. As the sun set over Arlington National Cemetery, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Team Viper stood at attention and saluted Marcus Richardson one final time. They'd kept their promise. They'd brought justice to his killers, exposed the corruption that had protected them, and transformed the system that had failed him. More importantly, they'd continued his mission of protecting innocent people from those who abused their power. In the year since his death, the Federal Police Accountability Task Force had opened investigations into 47 corrupt police departments, secured convictions against over 200 corrupt officials, and prevented an estimated 300 murders that would have been disguised as justified police shootings. The numbers were impressive, but Adrian knew they represented more than statistics. They represented families who didn't have to bury their loved ones, communities that didn't have to live in fear. Children who didn't have to grow up without parents because someone decided their neighborhood was worth more without them in it. Marcus, Adrian said quietly, speaking to his fallen brother one last time before they left. We kept our promise. No one gets left behind, not even in death. The brotherhood you built is still strong, still fighting, still protecting the innocent. Rest easy, brother. We've got the watch. As they walked back to their vehicles, Destiny ran ahead with the energy of a 9-year-old who still believed the world was fundamentally good. She stopped and turned back to them, her voice carrying across the cemetery. Are you really going to stop all the bad police officers? Adrian smiled, the first genuine smile he'd managed since Marcus's death. We're going to try Destiny. We're going to try as hard as we can. Good, because Uncle Marcus always said trying is what heroes do. They try even when it's hard, even when it's scary, even when nobody thinks they can win. Your uncle was a smart man. The smartest, she agreed. That's why he had the best friends. The mission that had started with tragedy had become something Marcus would have been proud of. Not revenge, but justice. Not destruction, but reform. Not ending the corruption, but fighting it with every resource they possessed, and never giving up no matter how powerful the enemy. Officer Blake Garrison died in federal prison 2 years after his conviction, killed by inmates who didn't appreciate child killers or crooked cops. His death made headlines for a day, then disappeared from public consciousness. Nobody mourned him, except the other members of his conspiracy who were facing similar fates. Chief Harold Brennan was convicted and sentenced to death, though legal appeals would keep him alive for years. Mayor Patricia Hawkins served her entire sentence and was released, a broken woman who spent the rest of her life trying to atone for her crimes. But the real victory wasn't in the punishments meted out to corrupt officials. It was in the reforms implemented, the policies changed, the oversight established, the accountability enforced. It was in the communities that learned they didn't have to accept police violence as an inevitable fact of life. It was in the families who got justice and closure. Most importantly, it was in the hundreds of people who didn't die because Team Viper was watching, investigating, prosecuting, and stopping corrupt cops before they could add more victims to their count. Marcus Richardson's death had changed the world, not because he was special or different from the other victims, but because he had brothers who refused to let his death be meaningless. 6 men who understood that honor meant keeping promises, that service meant protecting the innocent, and that justice required people willing to fight for it no matter the cost. 5 years after Marcus's death, Destiny Richardson graduated from high school with honors and announced her intention to join the Army. Claudia tried to talk her out of it, tried to protect her daughter from the same dangers that had taken her brother, but Destiny was adamant. Uncle Marcus served because he believed in protecting people, she told her mother. Adrian and his team continue that service in a different way. I want to be part of that legacy. I want my life to mean something.
Tasisay tamarikamtastai.
At her graduation party, Team Viper presented Destiny with a gift, Marcus's service medals, the ones they'd placed on his casket 5 years earlier, returned to his family with a letter explaining how his sacrifice had sparked a movement that was still growing. "Your uncle changed the world," Adrian told her, the words carrying weight earned through years of continuing Marcus's mission. "Not by dying, but by living with honor and inspiring others to demand justice. That's the legacy you're inheriting. Use it well." "I will," Destiny promised. "I'll make him proud." "You already have," Claudia said through tears. "Every day you live with courage and compassion, you make him proud." The Federal Police Accountability Task Force continued its work, expanding every year as more cities requested their assistance and more cases came to light. What had started with 6 men seeking justice for a fallen brother had become an institution with hundreds of agents, billions in funding, and the full support of federal authorities committed to reform. But at its heart, the task force remained what it had always been, a promise kept to Marcus Richardson. A promise that his death would not be in vain, that the corruption that killed him would be exposed and destroyed, that innocent people would be protected from those who abused their power. 10 years after Marcus's death, Adrian Donovan stood at his grave one final time before retiring from federal service. He was 52 years old, tired from a decade of fighting corruption, but satisfied with what they'd accomplished. "We did it, Marcus," he said, placing his hand on the headstone that had weathered a decade of seasons. "The task force is strong, the mission continues, and your sacrifice saved thousands of lives. I'm heading home to my family now, but your legacy is in good hands." Destiny graduated from the FBI Academy last month. She's joining the task force, carrying on your name and your mission. The brotherhood you built will never die, because every generation produces new protectors who understand what you taught us, that honor means keeping promises, that service means protecting the innocent, and that justice requires courage. As Adrian walked away from Arlington National Cemetery for the last time as an active federal agent, he felt at peace. They'd kept their promise to Marcus Richardson. They'd made sure his death meant something. They'd transformed a personal tragedy into a force for justice that would outlive all of them. The story that had started with a disabled veteran buying coffee in a gas station and ended with him bleeding out on cold asphalt had become a national movement for police accountability and reform. Marcus Richardson's name was now taught in law enforcement academies as an example of why oversight matters, why accountability cannot be negotiable, why every life has value regardless of race or neighborhood or economic status. Officer Blake Garrison's name was also taught in those academies, but as a warning, as proof that badges don't grant immunity from justice, that corruption will eventually be exposed, that people who abuse their power will face consequences even if it takes years. The brotherhood that Marcus Richardson built through 15 years of military service and 3 combat deployments had proven stronger than death corruption or institutional protection of killers. 6 men had answered his final call, had kept their promise to never leave anyone behind, and had transformed the system that failed him. Marcus Richardson died buying coffee, murdered by a racist cop who thought he was untouchable. But his death sparked a revolution in police accountability that saved thousands of lives and transformed American law enforcement. His sacrifice was not in vain, because his brothers made sure it counted for something permanent and meaningful and worth the terrible cost. That's what brotherhood means. That's what honor requires. That's what justice demands. Some promises transcend death, and some missions never end. Because protecting the innocent is not a task that gets completed. It's a commitment that gets inherited by each new generation of protectors who understand what Marcus Richardson understood, that every life matters, that power without accountability is tyranny, and that real heroes don't wear badges that give them permission to kill, but carry badges that hold killers accountable, no matter what uniform they hide behind. Marcus Richardson's legacy was eternal because his brothers made it so, and justice was finally served.